Tony Abbott, the former Australian Prime Minister who now works as an advisor to the UK Board of Trade, told Mr. Johnson to focus on climate initiatives such as the UN Climate Summit, rather than in negotiating trade deals. He added that Australia had been languishing with trade negotiations with China, Japan and South Korea when he became Prime Minister of Australia in 2013. Mr. Abbott said, they'd been languishing largely because particularly under the former government the negotiators had been, dare I say it, a little too preoccupied with labor standards, with environmental standards. All these are important, I don't for a second minimize them, but in the end a trade deal is about trade. Brexit deal's final chance, EU insists there will be no more deadlines in major warning. Elsewhere, French officials representing President Emmanuel Macron have suggested the shock of a no deal especially on fishing could have an immediate devastating effect on the industry. They stressed fishing is particularly sensitive in France as nearly 30% of the EU's hexagonal fishing is carried out there. One French diplomat said, the priority for the French is to have the lowest possible impact to keep access to English territorial waters. They added this meant Michel Barnier had to represent the interests of all major EU coastal states, especially France, effectively. But a Whitehall official close to the negotiations told Express.co.uk, we're determined to reach a reasonable deal which respects UK sovereignty, we're not giving in to French demands. EU Commission accounts seen by Express.co.uk also suggest the European fish industry mobilizes around 107,000 jobs in fishing, 80,000 in aquaculture and 100,000 in processing. According to the accounts, this generates £3.3 billion in turnover per year. Janza warned countries could follow Britain's lead and quit the bloc if the row over its €1.8 billion budget and recovery fund are not resolved. In a letter to his EU counterparts, he wrote, the EU today is a convoy of ships sailing on rough seas. In front of our ship's convoy called the EU are reefs and icebergs. There are many challenges we can overcome, but only if we abide by the contract that unanimously sets the direction of our voyage. Mr. Jance's letter was sent to convince the EU 27 to be forgiving to Hungary and Poland's recent veto of the bloc's next 7-year budget. The rogue capitals crashed the package in a disagreement over a rule of law mechanism that links future EU funding to good behavior. Budapest and Warsaw have been at loggerheads with the European Commission, the bloc's executive arm, over recent allegations of democratic and judicial abuses. Some read into the resignations a show of defiance by the Prime Minister and a chance for him to show his mettle. Others see a shift to a softer form of conservatism, a victory for so-called Tory wets and a likely betrayal of Brexit. Does the soap opera within Number 10 really matter that much? Have we not all seen the government's abandonment of fiscal responsibility and the ease with which it has overridden civil liberties over the last year? Then of course there is Brexit, the issue for which this government really won its thumping majority. Far from the resignations highlighting a change of course on the matter, it has looked for months like a sellout was coming, either in the form of a bad trade deal or the implementation of the current EU withdrawal agreement. Frankly, this government should never have signed up to the withdrawal agreement. It had a golden opportunity between the election victory in December, on the back of a promise to get Brexit done and when the agreement became law in January, to ditch it. It didn't. Lest we forget, the withdrawal agreement effectively locks Northern Ireland into the EU customs union. Northern Ireland must continue to adopt EU state aid laws, as well as EU laws in respect of excise and VAT. State aid rules which apply to the EU would apply not just to Northern Irish businesses but to those in Great Britain as well. Then, at the 11th hour came the Internal Market Bill. Leave aside for a moment the grandstanding over international law, the bill sensibly unpicks the border down the Irish Sea. However, it notably fails to suggest where the customs border then would be located. In short, it is not capable of practical implementation. The European Central Bank insisted firms could no longer use the coronavirus pandemic as an excuse to put off relocating their operations and staff to the bloc's main financial centers. EU bankers have long wanted the Frankfurt-based institution to put the squeeze on Boris Johnson to help snatch away business from the city. The bloc's main hubs, such as Frankfurt and Paris, had hoped Brexit would spell the end as London's status as one of the world's leading financial hubs. In order to continue offering services in the EU, British bankers were told they had to move sufficient capital and staff to the continent. The ECB said, banking supervision has provided flexibility where required, notably to account for impact of the lockdown measures and travel restrictions on the relocation of staff. No additional flexibility is foreseen in principle. Defense Secretary Ben Wallace secured an above-inflation rise for the Ministry of Defense's budget yesterday despite speculation the department was about to be gutted in next week's spending review. The green light from Chancellor Rishi Sunak means costly equipment programs can go ahead as well as no cuts to the military. Former Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt welcomed the news and said post-Brexit Britain will bring its world-class armed forces to the negotiating table as the UK continues to secure trade deals outside of the EU. He tweeted, "Diplomacy is often cold-hearted and transactional, so post-Brexit we will need to have something to bring to the table. What better than our world-class armed forces? Great news." Brexit has been hailed as an opportunity for Britain to renew its commitment to international trade as an independent nation. New Zealand High Commissioner to the UK Bede Corey suggested a trade deal between his country and Brexit Britain would help London towards strengthening its international position. Speaking of the trade opportunities, Mr. Corey said, "There are also key strategic reasons for pursuing this agreement in integrating our two economies. The FTA would send a signal to the global community about our shared commitment to free, rule-based trade against the headwinds of protectionism which are all too evident. And in support of recovery from the ravages of the pandemic." Since the UK formally left the European Union back in January, Britain and Spain are facing a decisive phase of technical negotiations on Gibraltar's future. As diplomatic tensions rise, there has been a significant increase of military activity on the Rock. This week, the HMS Kent, a 133-meter-long Duke-class frigate, left the British naval base to carry out surface exercises with high-speed maneuvers in waters adjacent to the Rock. Following this, the HMS Dragon, a latest-generation daring-class air defense destroyer and 155 meters in length, also entered Gibraltar. Back in September, the military exercise known as Gibraltar Strike took place and included the practice of rope jumping from helicopters and urban combat training. In a statement, the Royal Navy said, "COVID restrictions are limiting many of the staple fixtures of a visit to the Rock largely to a refuel/resupply stop. But there will be the opportunity for the Royal Marines to stretch their legs for the first time on this deployment."